Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria and I wanted to try a different background in this video. I wanted to stand in front of the Last Supper because it's an exquisite image, it's a very beautiful image and a very holy image, and I think that we should take the time to appreciate it and respect it. And although this particular version is not true to the historical period in which it's set, at least it doesn't make a mockery of it and defile it. And you have to ask yourself, regardless of what you believe, to take an image of such holiness and such purity and want to defile that, what sort of a sickness in the soul must you have? And that is what a lot of people ask themselves when they see a lot of the kind of things that are being pushed in the culture at the moment. What kind of people can be behind this? And people during the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics ask this question again and, ask themselves what kind of people really are in control of this world. Is the world under the control of dark, even satanic forces and the people that serve them? And, this is a question that people have asked me before, asked me to do videos on. I thought it would be very relevant and current for me to talk about that now. And, there's a lot of really weird theories about, satanic groups that are in control of the world and all of that sort of thing, which I'm not going to venture into because some of it is just way out there and there's not a lot of evidence for things that have been alleged, but I do want to focus on things that we can know, things that can be factually verified and are pretty undeniable, at least in my opinion. I need to be careful how I word a video like this, so it's going to be strictly what we can know. I'm not going to speculate about conspiracies and things like that. But even so, I'm going to present enough evidence to you, I believe, to answer the question one way or the other: is our world, is our society controlled by dark demonic forces? And of course, I'm going to be drawing on my own knowledge as an occultist, as somebody who has been around, who has seen lots of unusual things in my life, and for that matter has studied many different spiritual philosophies and been in the enemy camp and seen the enemy's plans, so to speak. And so I have that perspective to bring with me in discussing tonight's topic. The very first thing that we need to do is get a clear definition of what is Satanism. If the world is controlled by a secretive group of Satanists, what exactly is Satanism? And a lot of the times we get this really kind of cartoonish view of Satanism, of what it is, like something out of a Dennis Wheatley novel. This is the way that Christians often talk about Satanism, like something out of a B-grade horror film. But actually, Satanism is real. There are people alive today who call themselves Satanists because Satanism is a really existing spiritual philosophy. There are Satanic authors, there are Satanic churches and temples, and we can get a pretty good, clear idea of what the philosophy of Satanism really is and get a clear definition of that behind all of these kind of sick fantasies that are conjured up by evangelical Christians who are really just projecting their own shadow side. So let's trace the history of real Satanism. When did Satanism begin? Well, there's always been groups that have a kind of left-hand path philosophy within religion, and they've existed in all cultures. Satanism is more or less a Western phenomenon because it's a rebellion against the Christian God, using the symbols of evil in a Christian context. And, we had groups in a few hundred years ago, such as the Hellfire Club of Francis Dashwood, where rich aristocrats would get together and do all kinds of sinful things to kind of get a thrill out of it. But this was kind of performative Satanism. It wasn't real sincere Satanism as a spiritual practice, really, Satanism as a spiritual philosophy in its own right really came into its own with Anton LaVey, who was the founder of the Church of Satan in 1966, and who wrote the famous, or perhaps infamous, Satanic Bible. Well, he says that he wrote it, but LaVey actually, in some cases, outright plagiarized. In other cases, was just very heavily influenced by a number of other authors and their ideas, which he cobbled together to form the basis of his Satanic philosophy. And really, if you read the Satanic Bible, it's a combination of Ayn Rand, Friedrich Nietzsche, a little bit of Aleister Crowley, and a lot of plagiarism of an author called Ragnar Redbeard, who was essentially a social Darwinist. And what all of these thinkers have in common is that, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, they are all radical individualists. They see pursuing the desires of the individual as paramount, and doing so without any consideration for any other system of morality or any other person's feelings or anything whatsoever. And then the second thing that they all kind of have in common is that they have this view that human beings are not all created equal, that the world is divided into masters and slaves, and they unequivocally take the side of the masters and believe that a different set of rules should apply to those who are in the upper echelons of society, and that the rest of humanity should be the subjects of that upper echelon, because if you want absolute freedom in a world where you have to interact with other people, the only way you can truly have that is by dominating others and making yourself into an all-powerful elite. And so that is the real ethic of the Satanic Bible. That is the kind of people that the Satanist of LaVey's Satanism tries to emulate and become. And this kind of Satanism, it really it sees this way of viewing the world as fundamentally unequal, as the strong will prosper and the weak will be crushed underneath them as a matter of natural law, and any other way of being is unnatural. And so that's what Satanists believe the reality is. Satanism defined according to Anton LaVey. And really what this Satanism is, it's a rebellion against judeo-christian morality at the deepest level. Not just a rebellion against Christianity's supernatural claims, which is easy to do, but a rebellion against Christian morality, what some modern kind of thinkers would describe as cultural Christianity, the thing that is kind of like the air that we breathe in Western culture, the values that we take for granted, or at least we used to, until very recently in our history. And out of all of the thinkers that the Satanic Bible draws upon for inspiration, no one had a more sophisticated and developed way of thinking in this way than Nietzsche did. And he recognized that it was Christianity that changed the world so that we no longer lived in a world where the masters could reign supreme and treat all of the other people underneath them as objects to be used. And he resented Christianity for that fact. And he looked backwards to a time in ancient Greek, ancient Roman societies, which were thoroughly pagan, which were slave societies, and he lionized those kinds of societies as something that we should aspire to in the post-Christian age, something that we should revert to. And going deeper into Nietzsche's understanding of the kind of philosophical outlook which would form the basis of modern Satanism, it really begins to reveal how the people who would stand to gain the most from the normalization of Satanism are the people who have the most wealth and power in society. Because, Nietzsche recognized that when Christianity became the dominant form of morality in Western society, it meant that those kind of members of the ruling elite were greatly restricted in terms of what they could do to other people in their positions. It was almost like a loss of freedom for the elite. And, so these kind of philosophies, such as the philosophy of Nietzsche and the philosophy of Ayn Rand, are all about those people who are at the top of the social pyramid rebelling against Christian morality and not caring what anybody else thinks, acting completely selfishly and treating other people however they want, simply because that is what their selfish desire is, and they don't think that there's any objective worldview that should hold them back from that. And so really, when you strip away all the theatrics of it, all of the pentagrams and the robes and the candles and all of that, what Satanism really is this kind of philosophy, this underlying philosophy of life. And the figure of Satan is almost secondary to that. In modern forms of theistic Satanism, the demonic kind of spirits take much more of a center stage, and they're seen as the embodiment of those principles. But it's very much the ideas that are the core of this, a particular way of looking at the world that is different to judeo-christian morality. And even though there are, groups like the Temple of Satan today who claim to be more centered around social justice and things like that, a kind of watered down version of the kind of unapologetic individualism that LaVeyan Satanism represents, really, you could say that it's, at best, it's a watered down version of true Satanism, and at worst, it's actually not that different to traditional Satanism, because at the end of the day, whenever you're talking about a satanic philosophy, it's got nothing to do with taking other people into consideration when you behave a certain way, which is what Judeo-Christian morality promotes, but it's only about yourself, your ego, and your own desires. And because it's based in that, you don't need to take account of other people, no matter how atrocious the outcome is. And so long as that is the core, rather than taking consideration of everyone into account, it's going to lead to the same place eventually. So that demonstrates what Satanism is. I know it was a big part of the video, but it's important to get clear on definitions before we do anything else. And so you'll see already from the philosophy of Satanism, which has taken, form in modern times, but really is based upon a kind of dark current that was present in Western society for many hundreds or thousands of years. You'll see exactly what it represents, and it is very much the philosophy of the masters. It is the philosophy of an elite, particularly an elite who have either never accepted Christianity or have rejected Christianity in favour of some other worldview. They're quite happy for the masses to continue being Christian, because they see the religious institutions as one of the institutions that keeps people compliant, but as far as they're concerned, a different set of rules should apply to them, and they should be able to do whatever the hell they want to get their way and to use whoever and whatever they want. And so if we're looking at a group who were satanic, who are the epitome of what the philosophy of Satanism holds up as the ideal kind of way of being, we would be looking for, an elite group in society who behave in that way. And we have to ask ourselves if, looking at the society that we live in today, the people who are in control, do they behave in a way that is more in line with Christian morality? Or do we see a more satanic way of being? Consider the economic system that we live in, the fact that since the 1970s, real wages have stagnated while corporate profits have kept going up to the point now where, ordinary people have trouble feeding themselves, have trouble finding affordable housing, just struggling to get by in life, while people who already have more than they will ever need continue to get richer and continue to have the most influence on the political system to always get what they want. And so we see this divide happening, and it's not accidental. This situation has actually been engineered by successive governments who have been under the influence of people with the most economic resources to be able to lobby, who went to the same private schools as the people that are, in cabinet or in Congress. And so they were able to get the result that they want again and again and rig the system in their favour. And they knew that what they were doing was going to make life worse for the overwhelming majority of people. But they didn't care. They only cared about self-preservation, and they only cared about protecting their own position. And so the people who are in positions of political or economic power, who are trying to preserve their own position by preserving that unjust system, would you say that those people are more Christ-like in terms of the morality that they follow? Or would you say that those people are more satanic in their moral philosophy? I'll leave you to be the judge of that. Okay, but what about organised groups? What about secret societies, cabals that are satanic, that are in control of the dominant institutions in society? Well, like I said, I don't want to comment too much on that because I just think it gets really murky, and there's all kinds of conspiracies that just make no sense. And there's some things that could very well be true, but there's just not enough evidence to definitively say that it's true, and so I don't want to venture into that kind of terrain. I don't want to make any statement that I can't back up with verifiable evidence. But I will say that there are a couple of examples that we have of people in very powerful positions as heads of large corporations or banks or political figures doing some very interesting things in their spare time. And specifically, I'm thinking of the Skull and Bones Society at Yale, as well as the Bohemian Grove retreat, where many of the world's rich and powerful have gathered year after year. And we know for a fact that in the Skull and Bones Society, they had kind of quasi-Masonic rituals that had very dark, sinister symbolism behind them, and initiation rites that the members of the society would go through. And similarly, the Bohemian Grove, they had, or perhaps still have, these kind of dramatized kind of mock sacrifice rituals in front of a giant pagan owl statue. And these things have been verified, but it doesn't necessarily prove any conspiracy. People can do things for all kinds of reasons. It's just as likely that the Yale kids in Skull and Bones are just acting like a bunch of frat boys. They're doing stuff that's kind of edgy and dark because they're kind of young and they want to push the boundaries of acceptability as much as they want because they feel they can and it's their right to do so. And there's not necessarily anything intentionally satanic behind it. And the same again goes for Bohemian Grove. It could just be trying to recapture the glory days of those frat boy days, when those legacy students have gone on to become, the new powerful people in society. But I will say this, when you engage in even something which is just a pretend ritual with certain symbolism, evoking a certain feeling, that does inherently have power. And whatever it is that you're play acting, so to speak, at invoking or inviting in, it really can get through. It really can enter into you because, when you dramatize something, there is a little bit of your unconscious that believes that it's true. So if you're pretending to invite those energies in, then on some level you really are inviting those energies in and inviting them to have an influence over you and get their hooks into you. So that's something to keep in mind. I certainly think when you remove the kind of occult component from all of this, there are certain groups of very powerful people who are joining together in very secretive settings in order to get a certain agenda furthered by the political institutions that protect their power and their wealth. For example, where I am in Australia, there's a group known as the 500 Club, where a lot of the kind of business leaders are members of this club, and they donate money to the club to then pass on to our Conservative Party, which ironically enough is called the Liberal Party, in order to help them stay in power or gain power through the mechanism of funding political campaigns, through political donations. But the thing about the club is, because membership is anonymous, it's only other members know other members, a very high level of secrecy, and there's no kind of track record of where money is moving. You can't actually tell who the institutions are that are influencing our elections disproportionately, because it's all kind of siphoned through the donor of the 500 Club. And so there are these institutions that very powerful people have put together to maintain a system of power and control in their favour. And I think, whether there is a satanic component to that or not, that fact is undeniable. In the same way that unions organise workers to advance their common interests. It's just the flip side of that for the class that is the powerful class. So what about the demonic component to all of these theories? St. Paul wrote that this world is not controlled by human beings, but by the principalities and powers of the air, the dark powers of this world. And what he was referring to there is the demonic kingdom. And this idea that the prince of this world is Satan. Is there any truth to that? Well, I don't think that there's demons that exist like little red men with pitchforks running around poking people. But as I've kind of articulated in some of my previous videos, I do believe that there is a dark spiritual force at work in this world, that there are demonic forces at work in this world, and I have had my own encounters with those forces. And my most popular video at the moment is all about that. Unfortunately, because I'm trying to spread a positive message on this channel. But anyway, it is what it is. People just have a fascination with the dark side, apparently. But these forces really do exist. But for the most part, what they really represent is kind of just the darker side of nature, the lower aspect of the forces of the universe, what in New Age terms might be described as the low vibrational level of the universe, which is a necessary part of the whole. But, the problem with this force is that it's very self-serving and it's very aggressive, and it will try and interfere with other forces in the universe and corrupt them, and that is where it becomes something that is a dark or demonic force. The demonic force, the demonic aspect of nature, can express itself in the human world as well, through the evil things that people do to one another. And sometimes it does seem like there is a preternatural intelligence to all of this, but it's not necessary to believe that in order to understand what the demonic represents in human society and what it represents as a psychological phenomenon. I've done videos on that in the past as well. And so we all have the angelic and the demonic nature within us. And if you look at the kind of people that are in control of our world at the moment, are they more motivated by the angelic part of their nature, or are they driven by the demonic? Are they driven by the part of them that is greedy, that is violent, that is egotistical, that wants to take from and use other people with no remorse? That's what we really need to ask ourselves when we consider whether or not the demonic is in control of this world. Because if the people that run this world are controlled by the demonic side of their nature, then the demonic, by default, is the true master of this world. And that is the most kind of religious dimension to understanding this mystery. And all of the other organizations and groups and societies that may or may not exist are just outward manifestations of that core spiritual phenomenon that is unfolding. So what do I think the answer is? Unfortunately, I think yes. This world is controlled by dark satanic forces. I'm not quite sure how organized they are in the human realm. I really don't have enough evidence to answer that one way or the other, but I certainly know that the spiritual dimension to this is very real. It used to be a lot worse thousands of years ago. You know, for thousands of years, in fact, so long as we had agricultural societies, it was the norm for this kind of satanic worldview to be held by the ruling class. And it's only really, well, the process of revolutionizing the way we think society should be organized really began with the revelation at Mount Sinai, when one particular God, who would go on to be worshipped by the majority of the world as the one true God, chose not the mighty or the warlike or the dominant to be the chosen followers of that God, but instead favoured a people who were slaves and liberated them as an act which was holy, to emphasise the inherent dignity of every human being. And that revelation at Mount Sinai created a covenant with a people from which eventually emerged the teacher Jesus, and his teachings spread for the next 2,000 years, and that really revolutionized the way that we understand civilization and the kinds of norms that we take for granted in a good society. And suddenly it wasn't about the oppression of the weak by the strong, but really respect for all human life. And that process is still unfolding. You know, when you have such a radical change to the way the world is, it takes time for that to percolate. You know, if a snake bites you, you become sick. And, you know, you feel like you're at the end of the road. But then if somebody gives you the anti-venom, you'll begin to feel good again. But the anti-venom doesn't kick in as soon as it's administered to you. It sort of takes its time to work on you. But from the moment that you receive the anti-venom, you're saved. And civilization has received the anti-venom of judeo-christian morality to save it from the tyranny of these satanic rulers that we had for thousands of years beforehand. And it's only a matter of time before the light wins and the darkness is conquered. Even though we have seen a rebellion against that in the last few decades and an attempt to kind of undermine that by the powers that be, particularly in our cultural institutions, eventually the light will win. Truth always prevails in the end. And so the forces of darkness know that they've lost, and they are very resentful for losing their power. And that is why they inspire people to defile images such as this, because this image, it's not really an image of the end of Jesus' life. It is an ending. It is a Last Supper. It does represent the end of something, but it's not the life of this individual. What it's really the end of is the end of the reign of terror of the rulers of this world in the spiritual world. And that is why they despise this image and want to defile it as much as they can. Because it reminds them that they're the losers of human history, and of human spiritual history in particular. You don't have to be a Christian to believe that. I wouldn't consider myself a Christian necessarily, but I do appreciate the cultural impact of the kind of judeo-christian religious figures. And the reason why they are so angry as well is because they know that their time is coming to an end. You know, we've been told by this particular system that we live under that human nature is to be greedy and to be selfish and to be engaged in a war of all against all. But the more fundamental thing that human beings thrive on is community and cooperation and love. And that is the stronger part of our nature, and it will prevail in the end. And when it does, the satanic forces which are in control of our world will be completely dethroned. And the anti-venom will have truly run its course. And I have nothing more to say except may those days come quickly. I hope you enjoyed my take on this topic. If you did, please like the video, leave your comments down below, subscribe to this channel to support my work, and if you want to give me extra support, you can also hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.